On the sidelines of the G20 summit in New Delhi, in the pursuit of deeper multimodal connectivity, a memorandum of understanding was signed among several governments to establish the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. To discuss what the project entails and what it is being and why is it being seen by analysts as a counter to China's BRI, we are joined by former ambassador Mr. Dilip Sinha and a geostrategic expert Mr. Vinod Subramanian. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Let me begin the program with Ambassador. Sir, the IMES as a project, it's been seen as an equivalent to the silk and spice route put together. Now, what are the big opportunities and challenges?
Yes, this initiative is being touted as the spice route, which is supposed to counter the Silk Route of China. It is also being talked about as the great initiative to counter China's BRI. I suppose in a way it is. It is part of an initiative of the G7, which was started about 2 years ago, called the Global Partnership for Infrastructure Investment. And as part of this initiative, the G7 countries have started a corridor in southern Africa called the Libito Corridor. And during the G20 summit, they signed the MOU for the second corridor, which is the India Middle East European corridor. Now, the spice route, as you know, is an ancient trade route between India and Europe, where ships used to sail from India, go to the Arabian Peninsula, from there go by land across, then take over in Palestine into the Mediterranean and go to Europe. Once the Suez Canal was opened, then this land route became redundant, and ships used to sail across all the way to Europe. But the land route has become important because of the idea of pipelines and data pipelines, energy pipelines, which will become important, which are becoming important as part of increasing cooperation. But also, these will become much shorter if they take the land route. So it is an important initiative of the G7 and of the countries involved in this corridor.
Okay, Vinod, if I may get you in, although China's Belt and Road Initiative is much larger in scale, the IMEC is seen as a counter to that. Now, how fair is this assessment?
See, first and foremost, I believe that this project cannot be looked in terms of in isolation. When you compare it to China's One Belt and One Road initiative. Now, specifically speaking, as far as India is concerned, we have, launched many other initiatives. I mean, the nearest to this particular project would be the INSTC project, which is in fact geographically aligning to this particular project. So, and there are various other initiatives like the Chennai Vladivostok Sea project and the Afro-Asian Sea, the growth projects that is there. So, having said that, I don't believe that this can be seen as a counter to any nation. This is not, India has traditionally not believed in, alliances which are against any other country. So yes, people may see it as in competitive terms, but I believe that these two projects, are completely different in terms of its objectives and various other things.
Now, Ambassador, if I can, although Vinod has, rightly said that we cannot compare the two projects, the BRI and the current IMEC, but how can the IMEC stay away from few of the criticisms that BRI over the period of 10 years has actually, undergone those criticisms, especially the allegations of being a debt trap for developing countries. So how can we, refrain from such allegations and continue to excel in that domain?
The two are really quite separate, as we know, this rightly mentioned. Now, we can take up the BRI and discuss the BRI and its drawbacks and why it's called a debt trap and its impact on the countries that are partners in the BRI. And then we can look at the potential of the IMEC corridor. But the fact remains that the IMEC corridor is still in the planning stage. So we don't know what its impact would be. But keeping in mind the main drawback of the BRI was that most BRI projects were politically motivated, and they were essentially white elephants meant to showcase China's economic might. And most of them were undertaken without proper business cost benefit analysis.
Right.
So they were expensive projects that did not lead to the kind of economic development or even the generate enough profits for the project to pay for themselves. So the result was that the countries were saddled with these debts, which they had taken for financing these projects. Now, in the case of IMEC, what is happening is that the corridor is being built across a route that already is a flourishing trade route. Now, for India, Saudi Arabia, and UAE are already major trading partners. Go further on into Israel, another major trading partner. Then on to Europe, another major trading partner. So we are looking at an existing trade route which is being made more efficient and shorter by its for greater efficiency. And that is what makes it easier to understand. And this will be a project in which the private sector will also step in, which means there will be a cost-benefit analysis before anybody puts money in. Whereas in the case of the BRI, many of the projects were projects that the private sector had refused to fund. And then the government stepped in and made a mess of it.
Also, Ambassador, if I may intervene, I think the fundamental difference between the IMAC and BRI would be, since the BRI was completely driven by one particular country, and whereas in this case it's a congregation of various countries. So that also would be a fundamental difference. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're absolutely correct. The BRI was essentially a scheme of China to increase connectivity with those countries where either it had political interests, strategic interests, or commercial interests of importing raw materials. So the connectivity was essentially like hubs, spokes and hubs that connecting to China, where China could import raw materials. Now, China does not import too many finished products from these countries. So the result was that these countries piled up debt without having any way to repay, because unless you export back to China, you cannot possibly generate enough funds to pay for the debt. So you quite rightly point out that here there are many countries involved, and these countries are already major trading partners of each other.
Right.
India, Germany, India, France, India, Italy are already major trading partners. UAE is our third largest trading partner. So these projects already have an established economic viability, and that is very important.
Vinod, would you like to respond to what Mr. Sinha said?
Siddharth, just one more point. I mean, just to add on to what Mr. Sinha said, is, I mean, the OBOR, one failure of it was the lack of coordination efforts. See, this is a let's say multi-nation project or multilateral project.
Right.
And major drawback was the lack of coordination between different countries. Now, on the same thing, if I may say, India has already succeeded in one such project, which is the International North-South Transit Corridor project, which, like it has seen better coordination. I mean, the MEA, as actually the Ministry of External Affairs, has taken in all the efforts to ensure the project, is succeeding. So this is an advantage which India will have in this particular project as opposed to OBOR.
Okay, it's a very important point that you have raised. Vinod, if I can answer this, to what extent can the IMAC help India's external trade, especially at a time when there's a lot of emphasis on the renewable sector, on energy transitions, which we have seen with Saudi Arabia, what we have inked. So how will this help in India's external trade?
See, first, I mean, as you are aware, this year the government of India did launch its foreign trade policy of 2023, where it has sought to increase its exports to, I think, $2 trillion by 2030. So, I mean, this project alone may not help us achieve that number, but it's one of the initiatives in the, in the right direction. And I believe that, these projects, I mean, have the potential to not just transform India economically, but even in the social sector, there are many other opportunities.
Okay.
I mean, for example, if I may just add, the new education policy of 2020 could be seen in some way, in this light.
Ambassador, would you like to add something to what Vinod said?
In this one, as I said, since this corridor is coming up on established trade routes and will increase the efficiency, one of the things that is happening is that there's a possibility of India exporting hydrogen, green hydrogen, across to Saudi Arabia, which would make it a an exporter of energy to a country from which it has been importing fuel all these
Right,
years.
oil, right, right.
Oil. The other interesting aspect of this corridor is that it will link Saudi Arabia to the Mediterranean Sea through Jordan and Israel. Now, this will be a geopolitical, an earth-shaking event. They are already talking about it, but now that this corridor has been welcomed by both countries, Israel has welcomed it, and so has Saudi Arabia, which means they are serious about it, and they are now looking at linking up the land route from Saudi Arabia across into Jordan and into Israel to the port of Haifa, and from Haifa, ships will go across, the pipelines will go across to Europe. This will be a great game changer for Saudi Arabia itself and for India also, because our pipelines also will, our access to Europe through these pipelines will improve, both for imports and for exports. So the target that Vinod mentioned about $2 trillion, all these become within reach if we use these, if the connectivity comes through as planned.
Ambassador, yeah, sure, Vinod, please go ahead. Yeah.
So if I may just add one point here, I mean, just to add to what the ambassador has said, this particular week, in fact, for the first time, Israeli officials have visited Saudi Arabia as part of a UNESCO meeting. And just last week, I believe, in this particular month, in fact, Palestine officials from Palestine did, in fact, visit Saudi Arabia. In the news that, there was a news that Saudi Arabia and Israel may normalize relations. So in this regard, they did visit. So yeah.
So we know geopolitically, how is it going to play out geopolitically? Ambassador briefly touched upon the geopolitical ramifications. Could you elaborate on the geopolitical effect of this project?
So this, has the potential to connect, India and to various other continents, not just Europe, but this also has the potential to bring Africa closer to India and even like various other countries in the Caucasus region. And one challenge, as far as this project is concerned, is the geopolitics in West Asia. Primarily, in recent times, relations between Jordan and Israel, there are some challenges. I won't say, like it's not that it cannot be tackled, but there are a few challenges which we need to watch out in this particular regard.
Right. Yeah, Mr. Sinha, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just to add to what Vinod said, that this will really have major geopolitical ramifications. One, it brings the US back into the Middle East in a very big way, not just as a security provider, but as an investor in infrastructure projects. So just the way America was a major investor earlier, it will come back as a major investor. It will, to bring back the China factor in it, you have China had come in recently and tried to patch up between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and actually succeeded in doing so. So this, in a way, brings America back to try and get Saudi Arabia back into its fold. And once Saudi Arabia catches up with Israel and starts this corridor, or even starts talking about the corridor with Israel, or normalizes relations, Iran is bound to criticize it very strongly. So we'll have to see how it affects their bilateral relations, which have recently started improving. But the very fact that America is coming in with investment and bringing in its private sector, and Europe is coming in with investment in this region, makes it extremely important that we are seeing important changes taking place in the Middle East now with this corridor.
Siddharth, just one more point I would like to add here.
Sure.
So traditionally, these areas, we're talking about, in recent times, Turkey has considered it to be its area of influence. So this could also impact, Turkey's foreign policy ambitions. The fact that it is trying to, let's say, control West Asia. And to some extent, it has succeeded in recent times. Just one point I wanted to add.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Vinod. In fact, Turkey has made a statement saying that you can't have connectivity between Asia and Europe except through Turkey. But Turkey should remember that the whole search for a sea route to India, Columbus and Vasco da Gama and all that, started because the Ottomans had conquered Constantinople and broken the link between India and Europe. So it was Turkey that had become the hindrance to it. And now that we are re-establishing the old spice route through the land route, the sea route has always been there, but the land route is really a recreation of that old spice route.
Siddharth, just one more point, if I may,
Yeah,
with your
please,
add.
sure. Yeah.
See, the recent event where, many of these countries like, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, they have attained membership of the BRICS. So I wonder now how this project is going to play out. And, what is that's a different subject altogether, though. But
Right.
yes, I just wonder whether it's related or not.
Okay. Now, Vinod, analysts say that the IMAC is going to be more significant and relevant in this millennium because it is more about new energy, data, connectivity. So, what is the potential? The overall potential of this project. If we see in terms of the purely economics of it. So, what is this potential?
See, as Mr. Sinha has already described, that this project, encompasses all the emerging technologies which are there at present. Like, there are going to be data lines, there's going to be undersea internet connections, which are going to
Right.
bring both these countries together. So yes, it's going to be a huge impact. Now, as far as your question on what's the economic impact going to be, of course, the immediate thing that I can think of is going to be, the revival of many of these economies. Like, for example, UAE and Saudi Arabia. In fact, this is in tune with the Saudi Arabian vision. I think it came out sometime in 2019, or the document came out when it was also during the time when our Prime Minister visited Saudi Arabia in 2019. So this is going to, revive many of these economies. As far as India is concerned, it's going to improve the logistics sector, create more jobs. But as far as the investments required or even the impact, I think we need to wait for the next 2 months before once we get to know more details.
Okay, Ambassador, would you like to add to something that Vinod said?
Oh, he's absolutely correct. Saudi Arabia is making huge plans to prepare for the post-oil world.
Right.
When oil ceases to be the kind of important fuel that it is today. And when that happens, Saudi Arabia will have to have other resources to fall back upon. And Saudi Arabia is trying to project itself as a center of science and technology. In that, India can play an important role, as can the West. So if it wants to be a hub and utilize its geographical location for this purpose, then this corridor becomes extremely important. And for India, even in the short run, even in the long term, the energy requirements that it can get from the Arabian Peninsula is extremely vital.
Now, Ambassador, if we are to look at the Chinese statements and also the Russian president, what he said about the IMAC, they have not, holistically condemned such the project, but they have actually welcomed it. On the other hand, so how do we read into these statements with the Russian president saying that it's actually not a bad project, it's actually going to facilitate Russian projects which are already in motion, and why US has got into the project, he doesn't have any answer, but he sees a very not too many definitive roles. So how do we read into these statements?
Well, Russia, I don't think will be impacted by this corridor. In case Russian companies step in, by all means, they can. But I don't know whether America will allow that in the present state when Russian companies face sanctions. As for China, China already is going through an economic slowdown, and it has its hands full with its BRI. I don't think it would be in a mood to step in other places. So these becoming statements are essentially meant for the media to show that they are not to kind of show that they are not unhappy about it or to cover up.
So basically, there's nothing substantive, right?
That's another thing that we really have to see how far this progresses, and the most critical link in this corridor is the Saudi-Israel relations. If those talks do not succeed, then the corridor becomes a non-starter.
Okay, Vinod, would you like to add something to this? The Chinese and the Russian, comments.
See, I'd already mentioned this in the beginning, that there are similar projects which India is already executing in this particular region. And for example, as I told you, the INSTC project is in fact geographically aligned to many of these countries. In fact, one of UAE's neighbor, Oman, is actually a part of the project. So I don't see, I don't see any reason as to why Russia should oppose this particular project. And as the ambassador has pointed out, that Russian companies may at any point of time get involved, but again, there is a threat of sanctions under the Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act of the US. So they may, it's again a wait and watch situation. This entire subject is dynamic. So, things could change anytime. So we'll have to wait and see.
We could say that it's in a very formative stage, right? We have to see, wait and see over the next couple of months, how it takes shape and the end result of it, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of potential, but there are a lot of issues where things can go wrong at any stage. So we'll have to wait and see how it takes shape.
Okay, so thank you, gentlemen, for joining the Federal and sharing your valuable inputs on this project. Thank you once again.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.